3 counselors. 3 different camps. 3 things that stepped out of the tree line and were never explained. Stick around, because story 3 is the one that made the entire camp shut down for good. I worked as a night shift counselor at an overnight camp for 3 summers before any of this happened. My job was simple. Walk the perimeter every 2 hours. Make sure no one snuck out. Make sure nothing snuck in. For 2 summers, nothing ever happened. MC1, that changed on a Tuesday in July that I will never forget. It started small. One of the 12-year-olds in cabin 4 told me she heard something breathing outside her window. I told her it was probably a deer. "Deer breathe loud," I said. "Nothing to worry about. Zoom in, window at night." She didn't look convinced, but she went back to bed and I moved on with my rounds like nothing was wrong. The next night, 2 more kids said the same thing. Not from the same cabin. Different sides of camp. Different windows. Same story. Something breathing right outside the glass. Slow and deliberate, like it wanted them to hear it. MC2, I started to take it more seriously, but I still assumed it was an animal. Camps like ours back up right into real wilderness. Coyotes, bears, the occasional moose. It wasn't unheard of for something big to wander close. So on the 3rd night, I decided to sit outside instead of doing my usual loop. I picked a spot near the fence line where most of the reports were coming from, and I waited. SFX, crickets fading out. Around midnight, the crickets just stopped. All of them, at once. If you've ever spent real time outdoors, you know that's not normal. Crickets don't stop because they feel like it. I stood up. I had my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on yet. I wanted to see if I could hear anything first, and I did. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Coming from just past the fence, moving parallel to it, like whatever it was pacing along the boundary of the camp. MC3, not trying to get in through the gate. Testing the fence itself. I clicked on the flashlight and swept it across the tree line. For a second, I saw nothing but bark and shadow. Then the beam caught 2 points of light low to the ground, reflecting back at me the way an animal's eyes do in the dark. But they were too high off the ground to be a deer, and too far apart to be a coyote. Cut to B-roll, flashlight beam, sweeping trees. Whatever it was didn't run. That's the part that still gets me. It just stood there, watching the light hit it, completely still for what felt like a full minute. I could hear breathing now, too, slow, heavy, almost rehearsed, like something that wanted me to know it was breathing. MC4, I took a step back toward the cabins. The eyes didn't move. They just watched. I radioed the head counselor and told him what I saw. He laughed at first, until I told him about the fence testing, the breathing outside, 3 different windows on 3 different nights. The way the crickets went dead silent right before it showed up. He stopped laughing pretty quick after that. We walked the fence line together with 2 more staff members and a bigger flashlight. We found something that none of us wanted to find. 3 sections of the perimeter fence bent outward, like something had leaned its full weight against the mesh, testing to see if it would give. MC5, it hadn't broken through, not yet. But it had tried, more than once, in more than one place. We doubled security that night. 2 counselors on active patrol instead of 1. Radios checked every 15 minutes. All the younger kids moved to cabins closer to the main lodge. Around 2 a.m., one of the other counselors radioed in, breathless, saying he'd seen it too, this time close enough to make out a shape. Tall. Too tall to be a person standing normally. Shoulders too wide. Moving on 2 legs, but wrong somehow, like it hadn't practiced walking that way for very long. SFX, heartbeat. By morning, we had a decision to make. Cancel the rest of the session, or push forward and hope whatever it was moved on. The camp director, against my advice, chose to continue. We added floodlights along the fence line and kept overnight patrols doubled for the rest of the summer. MC6, the breathing outside windows stopped completely after that first week. No more sightings, no more bent fencing. But here's the part that still keeps me up. On the last night of the season, after all the kids had gone home and we were breaking down the cabins, I found something in the dirt just outside the fence, a single massive footprint, pressed deep into the mud from a recent rain. 5 toes. Bigger than any boot I've ever seen. Pointed straight at the fence like it had been standing there watching the whole camp pack up and leave. Quote, "It never wanted in. It just wanted to be seen." We never found out what it was. Nobody ever came forward with an explanation, and to this day, when people ask me why I don't take night shifts at camps anymore, I just tell them I prefer working during the day. That's usually enough to end the conversation. If you think that's the worst thing that can happen at a summer camp, you're wrong. Because the next story doesn't involve something staying outside the fence. This one got inside, and it didn't want to be found until it was way too late. Every camp has a building nobody talks about. Ours was Cabin 7, tucked at the far end of camp, boarded up long before I ever started working there. The story staff told new hires was simple. A kid went missing from that cabin decades ago and was never found, and ever since, nobody was allowed inside. MC1. I always assumed it was a story staff told to keep curious teenagers away from a structurally unsound building. I was wrong about that. I was 17 the summer it happened, working my first season as a junior counselor. A group of us were hanging out after lights out, the kind of thing that happens at every camp, no matter how strict the rules are. Someone brought up Cabin 7, and within 20 minutes it turned into a dare. Whoever could stay inside the longest without running out would be the one everyone talked about for the rest of the summer. MC2, I said I'd do 10 minutes. I regret that more than almost anything else in my life. The door wasn't even locked. That surprised me. I expected to have to force it open, but it swung in easily, like it had been waiting for someone to try. Inside, it smelled like wet wood and something else I couldn't place. Old, but not exactly dust. More like something had been living in there without ever airing the place out. Cut to B-roll, dark interior, dust and flashlight beam. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. I explored the small main room, found an old bed frame with no mattress, a collapsed shelf. Nothing unusual for an abandoned building. Then I heard it, a single footstep on the floorboards behind me. I turned around. Nobody there. I told myself it was the building settling. Old wood does that. I kept telling myself that for the next 8 minutes. The footsteps kept coming, always right when I turned my back, always stopping the second I turned around to look. Whatever it was, it seemed to know exactly how long it took me to spin around, and it timed itself perfectly to stay just out of sight every single time. MC4, by minute 5, I'd stopped pretending it was the building settling. Then the temperature dropped, not gradually, all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door directly behind me. My breath started fogging in front of my face, even though it was the middle of July outside. SFX, wind chill. I checked my watch. Only 6 minutes had passed. It felt like I'd been in there for an hour. I made the decision to leave early. Nobody would blame me, I told myself, walking toward the door I'd come in through. That's when I found it was locked. Not stuck, locked, from a mechanism I couldn't see or find anywhere on the frame. I pulled, I pushed, I threw my shoulder into it. Nothing moved. MC5, and behind me the footsteps had stopped pretending to hide. They were just walking, slow and steady, closer with every step. I started pounding on the door and screaming for my friends outside. I could hear them on the other side, pulling just as hard as I was pushing, and it still wouldn't budge, like something on my side was holding it shut just as hard as we were both trying to open it. MC6, that's when I felt it. Breath, cold and slow, right against the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I don't know how long it actually lasted, because time inside the cabin didn't behave the way it should have. But eventually, the door gave way all at once, and I fell out onto the grass in front of everyone. My friend said I'd only been in there for 4 minutes according to their count outside. My watch said 11, quote, 10 minutes went in, something else came out. Nobody went back inside cabin 7 after that night, not even on a dare. The camp finally tore it down 2 summers later, and when the construction crew pulled up the floorboards, they found something underneath that was never made public. Only that the demolition stopped for 3 full days while people who weren't camp staff came to examine whatever it was. I still don't know what was down there. I don't want to know. What I do know is that some doors get locked for a reason, and some stories staff tell to keep kids away from old buildings aren't stories at all. Both of those stories happened at night, to people who went looking for trouble. This last one is different. This one found someone who wasn't looking for anything at all, and it's the reason one camp shut its doors for an entire summer. My family has run a lakeside camp for over 3 decades. I grew up there, worked there every summer of my life, and eventually took over the day-to-day operations from my parents. In all that time, nothing had ever made me consider shutting the camp down. Until 1 week between sessions changed everything. It was the 2-day gap we get between camp sessions, when every staff member goes home except me. I stay behind to reset the grounds for the next group of kids, MC1, on the first night alone. One of the departing campers pulled me aside before her parents picked her up and told me something strange. She said a man had been standing at the edge of the lake every night that week, just after sunset, not doing anything, just standing there facing the water, not moving. I assumed it was a fisherman or a hiker who'd wandered onto our property by mistake. I told her I'd look into it and thanked her for letting me know. I didn't think much more about it until that evening, when I walked down to the lake myself to check the dock. MC2, he was there. Exactly where she said he'd be, standing at the waterline back to me, completely still, even though the wind coming off the lake was strong enough that it should have moved his clothing. It didn't. I called out to him. No response. I called out again, louder this time, and he still didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept staring out at the water like he was waiting for something to surface. MC3. I decided not to approach any closer. I walked back up to the main lodge and locked every door and window in the building, which I'll admit felt a little dramatic at the time. That night, I heard footsteps on the porch outside my room, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth like someone measuring the length of the building. SFX. Floorboards creaking, I looked out the window and saw nothing, but the footsteps didn't stop. They continued for almost 20 minutes before finally going quiet, The next morning I found something that made my stomach drop. Every single window on the lake-facing side of the lodge had a handprint pressed into the condensation, at a height well above where any of my staff could reach without a ladder. MC4, I told myself it had to be a prank. Someone from a neighboring property, maybe. I wanted so badly for that to be true. The second night, the man was back at the lake, same spot, same posture, facing the water like it owed him something. This time I didn't call out. I just watched him from the tree line, and after almost 10 minutes of complete stillness, he finally moved, turning his head slowly, directly toward where I was hiding, even though there was no way he should have been able to see me in the dark. MC5. I ran back to the lodge and didn't leave again that night. The footsteps on the porch came back, except this time they didn't stop at 20 minutes. They kept going until just before sunrise, circling the building over and over, sometimes pausing directly outside my window for what felt like unbearably long stretches of silence before starting again. On the third day, I finally called the local sheriff's department, even though I knew how it would sound. 2 officers came out, walked the property with me, found the handprints, found a set of footprints leading from the lake straight up to the lodge porch and circling it exactly the way I described, but no footprints leading away. MC6, like whoever it was, had simply stopped existing at the edge of my porch. They searched the lake shoreline that afternoon. Found nothing. No campsite. No vehicle. No trace of anyone who could explain a man standing motionless at the water's edge for 3 nights straight. But right before they left, one of the officers pointed at something floating near the dock. A single work boot, waterlogged, sitting upright in the shallows like it had been placed there deliberately rather than washed in. We canceled the next session. I told the parents it was a maintenance issue with the plumbing. I couldn't tell them the truth because the truth was that I didn't know what the truth even was. Quote, some things don't leave footprints because they were never meant to be followed. I still run that camp today. I still walk down to the lake every evening before the sun sets completely. And some nights, when the wind is just right, I make sure I'm not the only one standing there waiting to see who shows up first. If any of these 3 stories got under your skin, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like these. I'm curious which one stayed with you the most, so drop it in the comments below. This is Ones of Thought, and I'll see you in the next one. Tell me in the comments which story would you have survived, the fence, the cabin, or the lake.